Well, hello there, people of the internet, and welcome to my star chart resource farming guide for 2023. This is gonna be a very long video because we're gonna do the resources one at a time, so please use the timestamps in the description to skip around. Also, if you'd like a similar video for the rest of the game, so Railjack as well as all the open worlds, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. So first of all, we're going to be bouncing between three different farming styles for this video. The first one is going to be your standard everyday Dispo Desecrate Necros, which represents your everyday farmer, right? So it could be Pilfering Quota, Pilfering Hydroid, or even Petrifying Atlas. These kinds of setups are generally used for farming endless missions, and they work really well in a group. The second setup is going to be a so-called bomber, which in my case is going to be a Vastan times Zaku, but it could also be something like a Cataclysm Limbo. This is a primarily solo setup that's used to break containers and resource nodes. This is only useful in certain scenarios, mostly when it comes to rarer resources. And the last setup is by far the weirdest because it's just a Loki or any other squishy frame that has some defense, that has almost no mods on it, and it's combined with a squishy sentinel that just runs the spare parts mod. This is very good in some very niche scenarios. This is mostly used in capture missions and it's a little bit weird. So the way you use it is you run into a group of enemies and hide in the void with either your operator or drifter, which makes your sentinel the only target for enemies, so they will kill it very quickly. Once the sentinel is dead, you loot whatever it dropped, if it dropped something, because it's only a 45% chance, and then you need to die yourself so that you can revive your sentinel and reset spare parts. And you do this until you run out of revives. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but sometimes it's just straight up the fastest way to farm certain resources. Also, if you can farm in Steel Path without it slowing you down too much, you should definitely do it because you get far more resources in Steel Path. I'm not going to be doing it in Steel Path, and I'm also not going to be running boosters, and I'm going to be doing the mission solo, which I think is a good baseline, so you can basically only go up from there, because I like to show you realistic numbers. So, the first resource on the menu are alloy plates, and the mission I would recommend for farming them is the Dark Sector Infested Survival Gabi on Ceres. Dark Sectors are generally very good missions for farming resources because they are infested, and infested are by far the easiest faction to farm since they run towards you, and they also, on top of that, provide you with a nice bit of extra resources. So here's what you can roughly expect every 10ish minutes or so. The second resource on the list is Argon Crystals, and we're gonna be farming for those in the mission Hepit in the Void. Now for this one, we're going to be using a bomber because it's much easier to find Argon Crystal nodes than it is to have them drop from an enemy. Also, you only ever need to farm a few of them at a time because Argon Crystals cannot exist outside of the void, so once you take them out to your orbiter, they will start to decay. So only ever farm as many as you need at that time. It's pointless to farm 50 of them because in a week, they're all going to be gone. Now with this strategy, you want to open up the big map, which is done by either holding down M or whatever the map button is on consoles, and you want to be on the lookout for the little white squares, because those will show either caches, resource nodes, containers, or resources dropped on the ground. So the idea is, you run into a room, you see a bunch of white squares, you cast Vastan Time or Cataclysm, and if there are still white squares in the room, it means there are resources on the ground, though it could also be an Ayatan Sculpture, which is always a nice bonus. This is actually one of the better ways of finding Ayatan Sculptures. Now for circuits, we're actually gonna go back to Gabi, the Dark Sector Infested Survival on Ceres. Some missions are just better than others for farming, which is why we will see a few missions more than once. So here is what you can roughly expect every 10ish minutes or so. In at number 4, we have control modules, and you generally don't need to farm too many of these because you get plenty by fuffing around in the void, though Annie, which is the low-level survival, or Mott, the high-level survival in the void, are pretty great for endless farming because you're gonna get a ton of them. However, if you only need a few right away, I would actually recommend you hop over and bomb Samanthe on Neptune. This is the Hyena Pack assassination mission, so what you do here is you bomb your way to the boss, then you kill the boss, which is a very high chance of dropping the control modules, and then you bomb your way to extraction. This is a pretty good way of getting 6 or so control modules in a very short amount of time. In at number 5, we have Cryotic, and it doesn't really matter where you farm this one because a full excavator is just gonna give you 100 regardless of which mission you're doing. Most people nowadays, I think, will get their Cryotic from the circuit game mode in the Paradox because one of the mini missions there is to finish 3 excavators, which will give you 300 Cryotic. But it doesn't really matter, the place you farm Cryotic is mostly going to be decided by the other resources. So for example, you need need more Rubedo, you can hop over to Kolistan on Europa. Or you can also decide based on the tier of the excavation. If you want to farm a Lith tier stuff, you're going to do it on Earth, but if you want to farm Axi tier stuff, you're going to do it on Pluto. In at number 6, we have Ferrite, and your best bet for Ferrite is going to be Void, whether it is the high-level survival Mott or the low-level survival Ani. Void is a great example of why farming resources in Warframe can be very confusing, because Void actually has two common resources, Ferrite and Rubedo. But the ratio of Ferrite to Rubedo you get here is about 25:1 in favor of Ferrite. So here's what you can expect roughly every 10ish minutes or so. In at number 7, we have Gallium, and if you want to do an endless farm for Gallium, you're gonna do a Sur, which is a dark sector infested survival on Uranus. However, Gallium is extraordinarily rare, so if you're on your own and you're just using your everyday farming frame, you're only gonna get one roughly every 10, maybe 20-ish minutes. Which is why it's not the worst idea to try the crazy spare part setup in the mission Ariel. Now, because this is a submersible mission, you can also get Tellurium here. You will actually get more Tellurium than Gallium, but it's generally faster for farming Gallium than doing endless farming on your own. However, once you get into a group or you're farming in Steel Path, it's much better to do endless stuff. So you either do a Sur if you just want to get Gallium, or you can do Ophelia, which is also submersible, which will give you Gallium and Tellurium. In at number 8, we have Hexanon. Now, you might be tempted to go for the Cameria Dark Sector Survival on Jupiter, which is the only planet where Hexanon drops, but it's actually better to do Ganymede, which is a Corpus Disruption. Because while yes, you lose out on the nice resource bonus from the Dark Sector, you can actually get Hexanon as a rotation reward in Ganymede, and Disruption is just great for farming because it's a chill mission type that spawns a bunch of enemies all the time. So here is what you can roughly expect every 2-ish rotations or so, and you're gonna get a nice chunk of Oxium on top. In at number 9, we have Morphics, and for Morphics, you 100% want to head over to Mars and do the mission Wahiba, which is a dark sector infested survival. This mission has been the go-to for Morphics farming for at least 5 or 6 years. I think, the keyword being think, I actually don't know, it's because Mars has 2 rare resources, Morphics and Gallium, so they bumped up the rare drop chance so you can actually get a decent amount of them. But Gallium is far more rare, so you just get a ton of Morphics instead. Which is why, even though Morphics are classified as rare, you can easily get 4, 5, even 6 every 10ish minutes or so. In at number 10, we have Nano Spores, and for those, we're gonna head over to Eris and do the Dark Sector Infested Survival Zabala. This is an absolutely fantastic mission for farming resources because it's a high-level dark sector, so it has a 30% resource boost. So it's actually not that surprising that you can easily get over 7,000 nanospores every 10ish minutes or so. In at number 11, we have neural sensors, and for this I would still recommend the Salad v Assassination, which is the mission Themisto on Jupiter. Simply bomb your way to Salad, then kill Salad, who has a very high chance of dropping neural sensors, and then bomb your way back to Extraction. However, if you want to, you can actually do the spare parts nonsense in the mission Anake. This is actually a really good way of getting neural sensors because for some reason the spare parts mod drops 2 of them at a time. And finally, if you just want to farm endless, I would once again recommend Ganymede. In at number 13, we have Orokin Cells, and the first thing you want to do if you want to farm Orokin Cells is check if the Ferrite Assassination Invasion mission is up. If it is, do it because it's an extremely fast mission and Ferrite drops an Orokin Cell. But worry not, because even if Ferrite is not up, you can still do the mission Tethys on Saturn, which is the Sargas Rook Assassination. This is basically the same as all the other boss runs. You bomb your way to the boss, you kill the boss, which is a very high chance of dropping an Orokin Cell, and then you bomb your way to the Extraction. I've been trying to figure out a better way to farm Orokin Cells for years now, but General Sargas Rook and Ferrite are just fast and reliable. In at number 14, we have Oxium, and for Oxium I would highly recommend the Corpus Disruption mission Apollo on Lua. The most important thing about Oxium farming is that you need to be fast when taking down the Oxium Ospreys, the mob that drops it, because if you leave them alive for too long, they will charge towards you or your companion and detonate, and if they do that, they don't drop any Oxium, so you need to be fast and take them down as soon as you see them. So here's what you can roughly expect after about 10 minutes of Osprey swatting. In at number 15 we have Plastids, and for those we actually need to go back to Eris and to the Zabala Dark Sector Infested Survival. This is another one of those missions that's just good for farming, so we want to use it for Plastids as well, because you can easily get around 300 of them every 10ish minutes or so. In at number 16 we have Polymer Bundles, and for this one we're gonna do the Infested Dark Sector Survival Assur on Uranus. This is another really good dark sector mission, though if you would also like to get some Tellurium, you might want to do Ophelia instead, which is another survival on Uranus, but it's submersible, so you can get Tellurium there as well. So here is once again what you can expect roughly about every 10 minutes or so. In it number 17 we have Rubedo, and for this one we're gonna head over to Europa and do the dark sector infested excavation Callistan. Rubedo is the rarest out of all the common resources. I mean, I have 5.5 million alloy plates, but I only have 2 million Rubedo, so don't be freaked out if you don't get as much Rubedo as all the other common stuff. The reason we go to Europa for Rubedo is because it's the only common resource there, whereas on other planets it's often a secondary resource. So you tend to get more of it on Europa. You will roughly get about 600 or 700 every 10 minutes or so. Then at number 18 we have Salvage. Now for this one we're gonna head over to Jupiter and either do the infested dark sector survival Cameria, or we're gonna do Ganymede, the Corpus Disruption. I would once again highly recommend Ganymede for this one, though the dark sector infested survival isn't too shabby either. But in Ganymede you can expect roughly about 2000 salvage every 2 rounds. And finally at number 19 we have Tellurium, and by far the fastest way of farming Tellurium is actually using the spare parts setup in the mission Ariel on Uranus. Now Tellurium is an Arcwing resource, so you can also farm it in Arcwing and in Railjack, or just by doing stuff in submersible missions on Uranus. But I have never managed to get more Tellurium faster than by doing this dumb setup in Ariel. Plus, as you're doing this, every now and then you're gonna get Gallium, which is very rare and generally a pain to farm, so it's always nice to be doing something that gives you 2 resources at once. And that concludes all the main resources. Now let's do a few of the extra special ones. So, if you're farming anything on Zariman, bomber setups are the way to go. The reason for this is because it breaks all the containers and resource nodes, so it's just good for farming stuff, but it also highlights the plumes for you, because if you bomb a room and run through it and there's still a square on the map, it's a plume. It's basically the same thing you do when looking for Iatan sculptures with this setup. Then we have Somatic Fibers, and the only place you can get these is from the Corpus Disruption mission Apollo on Loa, where they have about a 15% chance to drop from the Demolishers. Those are the big beeping guys that run in to try and blow up your conduits. Then there are Javlok Capacitors, and I would recommend you farm these in the mission Lex on Ceres, which is a capture mission. These capacitors only drop from a special enemy called a Prosecutor, which will be announced once they spawn via Lotus. Now the reason we go to Ceres for these is because they only spawn in the Grenier Shipyard tileset, which is basically the entirety of Ceres and then like 3 missions on Sedna. These are very easy to spot because they have a glowing aura around them based on the element or damage type they are immune to, and they are very easy to kill. And finally we have the 3 research resources, those being Detonite Ampules, Fieldron samples and Mutagen samples. Detonite Ampules and Fieldron samples are very common. Basically, as long as they can drop on a planet, they will drop a lot, so you don't really need to worry about where you're farming as long as you can get them on that planet. Mutagen samples, on the other hand, not so much, because while you can technically get them on Eris, you barely ever get any, so you definitely want to go to DIEMOS, specifically the mission TERROREM, where you get loads. And that is pretty much it for the video, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out the memberships down below, pluggo, etc. And I will see you next time. Bye bye.